All right, it's time. It's Sunday night. It's time for the next video. So I get a lot of questions about taking a break from magic, because one of the warnings about taking up the great work in the Kabbalah magic book is that once you start the process, it's not really a good idea to stop. Okay, and the general premise is that the first grade of magical work, neophyte grade, is probationary. And if the magical work is not to your liking, presumably you can stop while you're in the neophyte grade and no harm done. That's a theory anyway. One of the problems with starting the self-initiation process is it tends to be a runaway process. It begins, and once begun, it needs to run its course. And maybe I can explain a little bit of how that tends to work. So can you take a break from magic? Yes, you can, of course. But there are risks. So I think the main question is, okay, so what happens when you stop? There's just sort of this dire warning of you must complete it once you begin. Well, the main thing comes about because you develop a perception of life which reveals that the things that once you thought gave you pleasure, they no longer do that. You begin to notice that you haven't really experienced pleasure very much yet. Okay, and so supposedly when you become enlightened, then you can really experience joy. I'm making a distinction between joy and pleasure. All right, so when people experience a relief from suffering, they very often will consider that to be pleasure or joy. Or when people experience a huge rush of motivation, like when you have coffee in the morning, okay, or when you level up in a video game, okay, that spike of dopamine is often mistaken for joy. It does seem to provide some pleasure, that sort of, oh, let's find out what's going on, let's go do this, right? Or if you have a release or a relief from suffering, let's say you make lots of money all of a sudden, and oh, I finally have enough to get my car fixed. I'm so happy. Well, all that's really happened is that you are you're simply relieved. The suffering diminishes or comes to an end. So the premise behind the mysteries is that, well, that isn't really happiness. That isn't really joy. That's simply a lessening of suffering. So once you begin to see that, then you begin to wonder, what is joy? Where is it? I don't seem to have it. It's nowhere around. And so in the process of seeing through the things that used to bring you joy, or what you thought was joy, you begin to notice that there's nothing. There's nothing that you can go after that's going to provide what you thought it would provide. And this leads to a period of darkness, okay, and that is the dark night of the soul. Okay, so that's kind of the danger of beginning this process. As you begin to wake up, you begin to see that the things that bring most people pleasure, or the things that they think will bring them pleasure, don't really do that. And then the world looks empty, like there's nothing I can possibly do that's going to bring me lasting joy. Okay, and so now what? And there's a period of dryness and darkness that you progress through. You're just trying to find out, where is my missing joy? Where is the joy of life, right? And one of the problems with that is if you start this process and you don't go through with it, you can you can get stuck for a very long time in a joyless state, okay? Of course, you already were most likely in a joyless state most of the time, but you didn't know it. And so you were kind of okay, but now you know it. Now you know that, oh, I've never really experienced joy before. What do I do? How do I find it? And then everything around you fails to deliver. And this can be a period of great suffering. It's hard to describe what that is. It's a period of dryness or emptiness, lack of purpose, and you feel like you're at the whim of randomness and meaninglessness. So in order to find your joy, the process you engage with is quite simple. You engage with imagination because the imagination is presenting all kinds of wonders to you, saying, oh, this might provide you pleasure. Take a look at this. Okay, that didn't seem to work. Well, this might provide you some pleasure. How about this? So you have this fun house of images that you're now in. It's like, where? I'm lost in this fun house. Where can I find joy? Okay, so in the process of engaging with imagination, you can find out what the real joy of life is, the enlightenment experience, okay? And what you'll notice is that the magical work with its circle of power that you draw around yourself and the pentagrams that supposedly banish negative influences and the invocations and the middle pillar, these are all ways of actively engaging with imagination. And this is something that most people just don't do. They're just kind of at the whim of imagination. And whatever comes up in the imagination kind of lords over their life. It kind of governs their outlook. And so one of the tasks is to gain control over what the imagination does in some way like that. Okay, so if you come across something that causes you pain, the imagination is what then flares up and labels it as bad and suffering. The suffering, like, oh, poor me. So this imaginary scenario comes up of poor me comes up, and then the suffering begins. Okay, that's the enlightenment process delves into how that works. You begin to look at how that suffering scenario arises within the imagination. You gain control over that suffering, the scenario of suffering. It's like, wow, it doesn't really need to be this way, does it? Okay, how can it be? Okay, so you begin to explore imagination, and what you're looking at is the automatic faculties of imagination that are just kind of up and running and auto-interpreting your life for you. Okay, and so if you engage in a path of meditation, that's essentially what you're doing. You are still engaging with the imagination. You are observing what it produces moment to moment. And you're also observing that, wow, that's not it. That's not going to deliver my happiness. That's not going to do it either. So how does this work? And you begin to notice that, oh, actually, as I engage with the imagination, the joy is simply in the engagement of it, in the recognition of it. Okay, so there's nothing in the imagination that's going to provide you your missing joy. It is the engagement with imagination itself that does so. Okay, this is not really so obvious at first, and this is why magic is difficult. Okay, it's difficult to wield the imagination and sort of get better at doing that, making friends with it, being interested in what it has to show you. All right, yeah. And when I say get some control of it, that's a bit of a misnomer. It's to get control of imagination is more to make friends with it and then establish sort of a partnership with it. Okay, that relationship between you and imagination is not really real either, because what's really happening is the imagination is arising in you and turning around to look at itself out there in terms of all the images that arise within it. Okay. And if you can do this in a path of meditation, fine. In a path of meditation, you just kind of sit there and wait for the images to arise so you can deal with them. And that kind of practice is very important. In a practice of magic, you deliberately prod the imagination to produce things, to show you things. You stimulate the imagination to begin its process of unfoldment. Okay, and the life of the average person basically hides from this process and like shrinks away from imagination, does not want to engage with it because there's too much suffering involved in that. When you begin to engage with imagination, all the traumatic scenarios from your evolutionary past begin to surface because they come up and they say, oh, this is something that countless ancestors have experienced in the past, and you need to make meaning out of this. This is something that is waiting for you to come to terms with. Okay, there's lots of that happening. It's going to start bubbling up. And eventually, as you get used to doing that, every moment becomes an engagement with imagination. And it's not like the imagination is ever going to stop showing you things from out of its depths that are disturbing or interesting or that need to be made meaningful. But the process itself of doing that eventually becomes joyful. It's kind of what we're here to do, and there's a great pleasure in doing that. And an image that I might give to you in regards to engaging with imagination is that when you do your banishing ritual, all the supposed negative forces get pushed out to the edges, okay? And then the middle pillar is right down the center of your magic circle, right? And so this is the middle pillar is the engagement in that field of imagination. And it's almost as though there's a light coming down, shining onto the view screen of imagination, and then bursting into radiance. Okay. I'm probably overdoing the imagery a bit, but that light comes down and bursts into like a sort of flower pattern or wing pattern of wings. And there are many powers and fears and hidden traumas that are embedded in imagination, which can now be liberated, looked at, and set free. And that's why, so this very process of engaging with imagination is the holy guardian angel itself. Okay, and so you could even say that as the imagination unfolds, these are like the wings of the liberty of what that feels like to finally accept the task that is at hand in front of you and experience the imagination as it unfolds moment to moment, and to never hide from it again, to never hide from the task that is being presented to you. And that task is simply to make meaning out of whatever arises in imagination, okay? And to be clear, all you can ever see is the imagination, okay? If you think, oh, I'm just looking at the world, I'm not looking at the imagination. Well, when you look at the world, you are looking at sensory inputs packaged and presented to you by the imagination, okay? And as those experiences are packaged and presented to you, they automatically get sort of categorized and boxed up according to your past conditioning. Okay, and so that this automatic categorization and boxing up and packaging, all this stuff that happens is being done in a way that is deceptive. It does not portray the world or the mind the way it actually is. Okay, because of the momentum of horrible events from the past, or scenarios from the past that have deprived you of something you need, or that have assaulted you or hurt you or threatened you. Okay, these are all things waiting to be recognized, and they're going to come out of the woodwork. They're going to come out of imagination and present themselves. so that you can reimagine them and make different meaning out of them. What this means is that the imagination is primary. Okay, your foundation is not in the physical world. Your foundation is in the imagination. Okay, and this is borne forth by Kabbalah. Basically, the foundation is not in the lowest sphere of the tree of life. It is actually in the second lowest sphere. Yesod is called the foundation. Okay, and when you reach the level of Yesod, which is above the material plane, supposedly, that is the level, that's the first entry into the plane of imagination. Okay, so your foundation is actually in the imagination itself. If you try to extract a sense of purpose from the physical world itself, we already know that doesn't work very well. Okay, eventually that's going to fail you. It's not going to provide lasting happiness. The way to that lasting happiness is then to engage at a higher level with the imagination itself as it shows its mistaken perceptions and images and memories to you. It presents those things to you so that you can reimagine them and reformulate them so that you can actually see what's truly happening around you, okay? In terms of the physical world, in terms of the mind, even in terms of the imagination, okay? And imagination is another word for the soul or soul. We can deliver the word soul as a non-count noun, okay? You don't have a soul, you have soul, okay? You have a soulful way of living. A soulful way of living is to live on the level of the soul, which is the true foundation of who you are, which supposedly persists after you die. And so it will keep going. Might even be true. So the imagination is primary. The material world is not your foundation. The imagination is your foundation. This means that the subject-object relationship becomes very important. All right, so when we engage, when we monitor the subject-object relationship, okay, that's me versus this thing out there. Me versus anything out there. Could be me versus the entire world that I see out there, okay? That subject-object relationship is now being examined. Okay? The interesting thing about that is that the joy is not out there in the world, and the joy is not within either. Okay? The joy is in that relationship. Okay? In order to experience joy, you can't just be sort of unmanifest as pure potentiality. That's really nice. Okay? But really to experience joy or ecstasy, it's in the interrelationship of that unmanifested state to manifestation. And so the joy is something that flows continuously, like an endless springtime. Okay, so the subject-object relationship is very important, even though the subject-object relationship is ultimately dualistic, and duality is not real, because all is one, right? It is as you examine that dualistic relationship, then you begin to catch your nervous system in the act of formulating it. Okay, because a dualistic relationship is very simple. It simply means, oh, poor me inside here, who's deprived and needs things out there. There it is. That's the dualistic relationship right there. Or it's also poor me inside here, who's being victimized by nasty villains out there. And this just poor me inside here, who needs things or is being hurt by things, okay? That is the essence of the duality. That is the illusion of our existence, okay? It doesn't mean that objects out in the world aren't real. It simply means that your separation from them isn't real, okay? But you can enjoy that apparent separation by examining very closely the subject-object relationships around you, okay? So the freedom of enlightenment is not within, and it's not out there. Okay, it's really in the. I don't want to say it's in between either. Okay, it's in that relationship. Okay. So if you're at the highest level of the tree of life, that's not necessarily freedom anymore. That's simply I'm disappeared into unmanifestation, and everything is pure potentiality, ultimate perfection, complete liberation from suffering, etc., etc. Mm, if you come lower on the tree of life to the sphere of Tifareth, which is in the center of the tree of life, now you have an interaction between the highest sphera and the lowest sphera. And this is the realm of the flow. And this is why the middle the middle sphera is called beauty, the experience of beauty within that subject-object relationship. And what does it feel like? It feels like a flower, or it feels like wings, angel wings, right? So you might take a break from magic. And what tends to happen when you do that, you can very rapidly forget uh, the benefits of magic. Okay, there aren't really any benefits per se, but you can forget the sense of fulfillment that you got from doing it. Okay, so, and then of course, one day you come back to it and you say, oh, well, let me do my ritual practice again. It's been 2 months, haven't done anything. Now I'm going to engage in my ritual practice again. Do the magic, and then suddenly you're like, wow, that was really great. Why did I ever stop? Okay, and so kind of what you're experiencing is that the reconnection to what the task is. In other words, your true task in life is to make meaning out of what's being presented. And when you stop doing that and just kind of get lost in your troubles in the world and go back to your workaday existence, you are turning your back on that, and you're just now proceeding in terms of the momentum of your life. And your life then consists of just one damn thing after another, right? And so you're back into that one damn thing after another mode, and you get stuck in that mode of, oh, I just need to get these things done, and then I'll be able to relax, and get stuck there again, right? And all it takes is a performance of ritual, again, to remind you, oh, this is the really fulfilling thing that I need to do. Oops, how did I forget? We forget the same way that we forget about a dream we had at night. Try to remember your dreams in the morning. It can be really hard because you wait just 30 minutes and to write them down, and suddenly you sit down to write them down and you've forgotten all of them. They slip away so easily. Very interesting too, because if imagination is primary, then you're going to basically lose, and you're going to lose it really fast. Okay, it's mainly because it gets covered up by your day-to-day experience, by the seeking for the end of suffering. Okay, so you get caught up seeking after things in the world. Like, in other words, when you start to go out into the world and try to get happiness out there, or try to lessen your suffering by going out there, oh, it's out there. Once I get it, I'll be okay. Okay, or once I get away from that over there, I'll be okay. You get stuck in that drama again, and the fulfillment of engaging with that, in other words, really trying to see through that, your work of trying to see through that relationship or prodding that relationship gets neglected, and it very quickly slips away, because the mundane world is much louder than the spiritual world, maybe. And so what magical ritual largely amounts to stirring the pot. And I'm bringing this picture here of an ibis. This is the way that ibises are in Florida, where I live. Okay, I know in Egypt they look a little different. And the ibis is the animal of the god Thoth, the Egyptian god Thoth, the god of magic. And the god Thoth is pretty cool because he has that bird's head, and his beak is sort of like a prodding sort of appendage that maybe writes. Maybe the beak could be said to write on scrolls. Or so when you watch an ibis in the water or in the grass, it tends to stir things up with its beak. Okay, and this is what you do when you do magical work. When you draw your magic circle, use your magic dagger or your magic wand, whatever. This is the beak of Thoth, which is prodding into the imagination, stirring things up, fleshing things out. Okay, like prodding those demons to appear so that you can make meaning out of them, so that you can reimagine them. They aren't really demons. Okay. All right. But your task is to summon them forth so you can see for yourself that they are not really demons. And when you stop doing that, when you stop stirring the pot every day, you very quickly forget the importance of doing that. And you drift into a life of just chasing after stuff out in the world, unfortunately, or running away from stuff that you think's out to get you. So if you need to stop, if you want to take a break because something's happening in your life and you have to live like in a refugee camp for 2 months or something, I don't know, like these things can happen, right? Because the magical work requires some seclusion so that you can do ritual work without anybody observing you and saying, what the heck are you doing? So if you're going to end up in a situation where you cannot do the magical work, but you've already begun it, okay, and you're worried about the dark night of the soul, okay, that is a bit of a pickle, yes. Okay. My first bit of advice is to see if you can make it work anyway. Because the obstacles we think we face, we might not really face. Okay, let's say you're living with somebody and you're just embarrassed to do magical ritual where they might be able to hear you. I've already talked about this in a previous video. That fear, performance anxiety is really kind of an illusion. And I find that people nowadays are actually very tolerant of strange mystical practices. Okay, but still, who knows? You might have to go and live with your parents for a while, and they are completely intolerant of anything remotely magical because of some archaic, Christian beliefs that they still cling to. Yeah, there are things you can do. For one thing, you could make a contract. Okay. Not necessarily a contract where you sell your soul to the devil. That's not really possible because remember, soul is not a count noun. It is a non-count noun. You don't have a soul. You have soul. Okay, you experience soul. Soul is something you experience. It is not. It's not like you have one and I have one, and it's not an object that you can give away. Okay. However, the contract that you make, though, is a pledge that, well, I'm going to continue to confront, I'm going to continue to do my shadow work. So it is sort of like a contract with the devil. In other words, I promise I'm going to continue to do magic work so that I can see that these demonic forces are not really demonic forces. And the interesting thing is that the soul, or the psyche, or the imagination likes that. Because it keeps showing you things out of its depths, saying, you need to make meaning out of this. You need to reimagine this. Okay? If you don't believe that's true, try having PTSD for a while. Okay? Because that's exactly what happens in PTSD. The soul or the imagination pathologically shows you things that you need to make meaning out of desperately. Okay, this happens to all of us, but if you have PTSD, it's really bad. It gets acute, really harsh, to the point where you can actually experience very real hallucinations, very real seeming hallucinations. And that simply amounts to the imagination saying, hey, this is urgent. You need to reimagine this. Okay, and that's why we keep a magical journal. So as the psyche shows us things from out of its depths, we make meaning out of them. We reimagine them. Okay. And so in a sense, that is sort of like promising all the hidden demons inside you that you are still going to work with them. Okay. So if you need to take a break from magic, you can always make a contract and say, this is only temporary. I plan for 3 months to live this way. I'm no longer going to do my daily practice in which I, prod forth the psyche to reveal things to me. Okay. But I do plan to renew it at this particular day, and then sign it in red. Okay, not in blood, but in red. So you and then put it inside your magical diary. All right, and continue. You can use that as a bookmark in your magical diary. Continue to keep your magical diary. You want to keep doing a daily entry. Okay, because you should be able to still do that, even if you're living in very harsh conditions. Hopefully, you should still be able to keep a diary so that you can keep processing the things that occur to you. Okay, so keep the process going as much as you can, at least on paper or in your keyboard journal, on your digital journal. Yeah, you can make a digital contract too, of course. All right. So making a contract might be very helpful, okay? It doesn't mean you're going to keep the contract, okay? But it shows that you are dedicated. It's like this is temporary. I do plan to get back to the practice again of doing this. And that is the practice of the magical diary. So while you are taking a break from magic, you continue to make entries in your magical journal. Another thing you can do, since you're not doing magic anymore or ritual, okay, is you can adopt a very undramatic spiritual practice. And Zen is probably the best example of that. And if you read books by Charlotte Yoko Beck, one of the books is Everyday Zen. Another one is called Nothing Special. Those two are great introductions to Zen. Because Zen simply involves sitting there, watching the thoughts that come up. That's it. That's really all there is to it. And also observing bodily sensations and things like that. Those are very much the same thing. Okay, everything's arising in imagination. Everything is. Okay, so you're constantly paying attention to what's coming up. So you can still do that, and nobody will know. Okay, you can still have a practice like that. In fact, you can perform Zen even while you're doing things, while you're working, while you are doing sort of mundane tasks around the house. You can do Zen. And of course, Zen work is something, I believe I prescribed that even in the Kabbalah Magic book in the Zalater grade. Yeah, to get familiar with paying attention to what arises in the imagination. Another thing you can do when you take a break from magic is you can continue your spiritual practice by the practice of Lectio Divina. Keep in mind that reading is itself a sort of shamanistic act. By reading, you engage with imagination. Okay, so reading itself can be transformed by you into a magical practice. Okay, not as powerful as dramatic ritual, acting things out, things like that, right? But still fairly potent, fairly powerful. So notice that reading and writing both engage with imagination. Okay, reading is very potent that way. Unlike watching a movie where everything is imagined for you pretty much. All right. And you might notice that the most provocative movies tend not to imagine everything for you. They leave a lot to the imagination. How interesting. And so you can do even better than that by taking up a sacred reading practice. Okay. I've seen people describe Lectio Divina like people from the church, things like that. I'm never quite satisfied with their way of doing it. It's too shallow. You might look up the practice of close reading to get a better handle on what happens during Lectio Divina, but still, that's not enough. I can give you a clue right now, okay? When you do Lectio Divina, you regard the act of visualizing what's being presented on the page before you. You regard that as a sacred act, because this is the task that we have come here to do, to make meaning out of what arises in imagination, okay? So this is a sacred thing you're doing, okay? And when you do that, you pay attention to imagination on 3 different levels. Level 1 is auditory. So you imagine the voice of the person who's speaking. What does it sound like? Are they standing at a podium? Are they standing on a pulpit? Are they having a fireside chat with me? Are they giving a fiery political speech? What do they sound like? You got to hear them in your head, okay? Level 2, you want to imagine what's literally being described by them, the actual images that pop up based on what they're describing, okay? So if I'm talking about somebody eating a fruit from a tree, I literally picture the apple or the pear or whatever it is, and somebody reaching for it and plucking it. I literally watch those things, okay? And then level 3 of the imagination is abstract visualization for all the schematics that might arise. Okay, and this is where abstract maps come into play, like the tree of life. Okay, or a sequence of events happens sort of on a timeline, boom, 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 like that. That's so. What you do is you pay attention to all 3 levels of imagination while you're reading. Okay, and you constantly pay attention to what's arising, both literally in the terms of the concrete images, okay, and abstractly in terms of idea maps, okay, or timelines or hierarchies, things like that, okay. All 3 levels, and you pay attention to how those happen. Because what you'll notice is in your practice of ceremonial magic and Kabbalah, it's not only the concrete images like tarot cards, the images on tarot cards that are important, but it's also the images of interacting concepts, such as the sphere oath on the tree of life. Okay, so level 2 visualization is the images on tarot cards. Level 3 visualization would be the relation of the tarot cards to each other in the form of the tree of life diagram. Okay. So you can do a lot of spiritual work if you really know how to visualize while you're reading on all 3 levels of imagination. Possibly even beyond that. That is the practice of Lectio Divina, divine reading. And the things you would read then, of course, while you're taking a break from magic would be spiritual texts. Okay, it could be the Bible, could be stuff from the East, could be stuff from the heretical saints like Saint Teresa of Avila or Saint John of the Cross. Could be Buddhist texts, things like that. What I would suggest is you stick to non-dual type texts of the non-dual traditions. Just look up non-dual, find some books maybe. Might be interesting for you. All right, so yes, you can take a break from magic. There is a risk that you will end up sort of stranded in a dark night of the soul. There's also a risk that you will lose the memory of the value that a magical practice provided to you. And that risk also is that you won't get back into it because you don't know what you're missing. Okay, because the memory of the benefits of magic quickly fade. And you recover them only when you start up again. And it's like, oh, right. This is what I was supposed to be doing all along. I'm supposed to be prodding the imagination to reveal things to me so that I can make meaning out of them without end, on and on. All right. Is there anything beyond that? Well, not really. And I would like to even say that in the Golden Dawn curriculum, in the outer order, the goal is to reach that middle sphera on the tree of life. That's Tifareth. Do you really need to go any higher? Yeah, that's inevitable, okay? But the way I see it, really, if you go beyond that, or if you go to the level of the supernals, the top three spheroth, once you get to that level, it's really all you're doing there is preparing for death. You're preparing to leave this life. Okay, some people might disagree with that. Like, it just depends how thorough your work is. Because if you are really inflaming yourself with prayer during ritual, you're doing your daily work with a lot of intensity, you're keeping your magical journal work, you will begin to touch down on enlightenment experiences, possibly even in the outer order grades, in the lower spheroth of the Tree of Life. And once you've touched down like that and you've had a glimpse of, I don't know, immortality or oneness, um, whatever grade you're in on the Tree of Life or whatever sphere you are in the Tree of Life is no longer that important. Okay, so if you're really doing the work, all that's really important is that you get to that Tifareth level, the center sphere on the Tree of Life. The rest will take care of itself. Okay, and when it comes to, divine joy or ecstasy, that's really something we experience while we're alive. Okay, so when you get on those higher spheroth, that's no longer the realm of the living. It's wonderful, but it's not that joy of being alive anymore. It's beyond this. I don't want to say beyond this world. It is simply not participating in this outer material world anymore. Okay, supposedly, yeah. I'm not dead, so I really don't have the authority to talk too much about what happens beyond death. So that's kind of the theory of it, and since I can see into the imagination, it does seem to be true. Does seem to be some truth to it. And that process of the imagination engaging with itself, the imagination stirring its own pot, as it were, continues on and on and on. And it becomes a pleasure to do that. It becomes a joy, an unending joy to do that. All right, until next time.